gets absorbed through fire, it can be purged specifically with fire. And before we go through the kashering process with boiling water, particularly with boiling water, there are some prerequisites, some things that we need to ensure of. So the preparation for kashering itself is an important part of the process. We have to make sure that the vessel is clean, does not have any residue, so that the water is going to be able to get in all parts of the vessel. Halacha Yudches. Lifnei ha'hagola tzorich lenakes sakli l'shafshefa yafa le'erid b'mena kol lichloch chaluda d'vukum bay. Before the hagola process, we need to clean the vessel, and to clean it, to rinse it well, to scrub it well, to take off any dirt and rust that's stuck there. Hatamos are the reason being, because it could be there's forbidden absorption under the rust there. The hagola process will only take away whatever is absorbed in the vessels of the walls of the vessel. Doesn't take away the actual rust, the crustation that's blocking the wall. It's not going to take that away. A vessel that's being kasher with fire in it, one does not have to clean it in such a fashion before the kashering process. Why? Because fire, being that it's so potent, it will burn up anything in its way, its path. If the rust does not have any actual mamashas, meaning it doesn't have any actual substance to it, it's just discolorment. Discolorment in halacha is not a problem. It may not look nice, you may not be able to sell the vessel, but it's not a problem with regards to kashering, because if you scrape it, there's no crumbs come off. It's only a discolorment. Then it's not required to be removed. A vessel has a very, very narrow neck, a very narrow opening, like a gooseneck. That's you cannot take any rust out that's inside there, then you cannot kasher it, because you wouldn't be able to get away unless you can actually put in some kind of a device to clean it first. Okay, so the idea is that when we're kashering with boiling water, the vessel has to be cleaned of any rust. Discolorment is okay, but any actual rust. Whereas when we're kashering with fire itself, we're not concerned about that, because the fire will burn up anything in its path. Okay, is that clear? Now, the next halacha gets into cracks. I want to just give a little introduction to this. The kashering process takes out whatever's absorbed in the walls of that vessel. But if you have cracks in a vessel and you have actual food residue stuck somewhere, it doesn't help you. You have to get rid of the food first. Called mamashas, actual substance. So where can I have mamashas? So one example would be if I have a knife that has a wooden handle and has a metal blade. So the two separate parts are not bonded as one. There's a screw that actually fastens the wooden handle to the metal blade. And being that there's a little bit of space sometimes by the wooden handle where the knife fastens to where the metal fastens to the wood, there's a possibility that food residue got inside there. So first I have to clean that area. Maybe I can unscrew the wooden handle or whatever. Or if it's all metal, wouldn't be a problem if it's all one piece. But when it's two separate pieces, the possibility of having a buildup of residue exists. The same would be, let's say, for example, a wooden butcher block table. I have a butcher block table, and let's say I'm going to do hagolah, I'm going to pour boiling water over it. If there are grooves inside the table, and there's going to be food residue left over, it doesn't help me to do the hagolah. First, I have to get rid of all the food residue. And one way to do that would be to sand down the table to get to a layer where it's going to be a smooth surface. And then we don't have any concern about any food residue. Then we're in a position where we can kasher it. Okay? Let's look at this inside. Halacha test. Whenever there's a vessel that has a crack. By the way, some commercial vessels, they have plates on the outside. It'll be like, it'll say Grow In or some kind of a company that manufactures this particular type of vessel. That's also relevant because when you have this plate, if there's a plate where there's a possibility of some residue getting between the plate and the metal, and it's an area where you can have, spillage, whatever, you have to make sure, you may have to burn that area to make sure there's no residue left over there. So again, it's a possibility for residue to be trapped. One has to be cognizant of that as part of the kashering process. Another place would be where you have the handle fastening to the vessel itself. You have to clean it, and you have to clean it before kashering. If it's not possible to clean it, then the hagola will not help. They said the knife that has a crack between the handle and the knife, and it's impossible to clean it, then hagola will not help. Now, if it's a very tight fit, where there's no residue, then you can just soak it, let's say in a soap solution to make sure, but then you should be okay. And if you want to kasher a vessel that has a crack, but it's not possible to clean it, then what you could do, if it's made out of a material that can withstand fire, like if it's made from metal, then one would have to first expose that area of the vessel to libun kal, which would be a temperature of fire about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the lower temperature of fire. Libun gomer would be like 900 degrees Fahrenheit, but libun kal would be about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Libun soiref is called mamash because then the fire would burn up any residue. And into the makom would be found by the crack. Then one can go kasher it afterwards. Any questions on what I said so far? Okay, now comes the fun stuff. So we said that there's two different types of, generally speaking. I mean, you also have the cold vessel, but when it comes to hot application, you have kashering with boiling water, kashering with fire. Now we have another law that comes into play. When we kasher with boiling water, we're not supposed to kasher the vessel when it's a ben yoimah, when it was used within the last 24 hours, because since the kashering process with boiling water doesn't burn up the isser, the prohibited material in its place, it rather just extracts it and brings it back out into the water, yes? So if the vessel would have been used within the last 24 hours and the taste that's inside the walls of the vessel would be a fresh taste, now what am I doing? I'm bringing out a fresh forbidden taste in the vessel, and it's going to get reabsorbed in the vessel. I got a problem again. Whereas if the vessel would have not been used within the last 24 hours, and then I go ahead and I kosherize it, so then what gets reabsorbed in the vessel would be considered a spoiled taste and would not render the vessel problematic. Since the hagola does not actually burn the tama iser, rather just removes it. We can be concerned maybe after the vessel split it out, tama iser, the forbidden taste into the water. It's going to reabsorb in the water. One should not kasher a vessel with boiling water. It's a ben yoimei. On this very day. You have to wait from the time of the bishul of the Isser a period of 24 hours. And also the vessel was not used for hot within the last 24 hours. Since at this point, after 24 hours, the vessel, not a ben yomei, was not used within the last 24 hours, then what's the halacha? The forbidden taste became pogum, became non-food palatable. Because shenifla, the tama pogum minakli, when the taste that's spoiled gets spit out from the vessel, it no longer has the potency or the power to make the vessel forbidden, kimuvan. That's halach with regards to boiling water. But now we're going to say at the end, we're going to conclude, kimuvan, it's understood that by hechsher liban, when we're kashering something with actual fire, since the actual taste gets burnt, one could kasher a vessel, even if it's a ben yoimei, even if it was used for forbidden substance within the last 24 hours, if I'm using fire, because fire is going to burn everything up in its place. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Because it burns everything in its place and there's no concern about it being a fresh taste anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. A different effect. Even when you're kashering libun kal, you could also do a ben yamin as well. Now, Halacha Chabala gets into how the actual halagola process works. There are a few set of laws that we have to be aware of, and one of them is that when let's say, for example, this is my make-believe boiling pot. Now I'm going to put, let's say, a cold vessel, it's ambient temperature or cold, I'm putting it into the pot now. I'm cooling down the water to some degree because I'm entering something in it that's cold, and now the water has to, refire itself up and get hot till it's going to be able to overcome and overpower the cold that comes in through this additional vessel. That's just ambient temperature, and then it's going to boil. So it might take another 30 seconds for the vessel to boil again, right? So when I put a vessel into kasher, I have to wait while it's inside the water until the water starts to boil again. Because it's not going to boil unless it's a huge pot with tremendous force. Usually the water will be affected by the addition of a cold vessel. It's going to cool down the water to the point where it's no longer going to be boiling. So if that happens, then you have to wait for the vessel to be inside the water until the water is going to boil again, which usually takes about 30 seconds, and then you can take it out. Okay? Seder Hagola. Acha shenika sakli, after cleaning the vessel, mikol hadavu, or if you have anything that's stuck to it, v'ina kli ben yoyme, the vessel is not a ben yoyme, kvar muchan akli lagile, the vessel is now ready to be going through a Hagola process, the boiling. Eich machshire b'Hagola, how does one kasher with Hagola? Mimale kederas mayim, one fills up the vessel, the pot of water, umamid al ha'esh, you put it on the fire, achayir techol hamayim bi'alabois, until the water boils, starts to boil. Then you put the vessel inside the pot. If, for example, the pot is not big enough to be able to envelop what I'm kashering all at once, one could kasher a vessel in parts, half and half, do a little bit more in half, a little bit more than half, just to be on the safe side, and that's acceptable. By Tevila, when you're titling something, it has to be a total immersion at once. But by kashering, it's allowed to kasher something in parts, as long as you kasher it properly. Halacha Chavbeis, how does one put the vessel into the water? You can lower it into the boiling water through a basket. But don't stack too many vessels at a time in the basket, because then the vessels will touch one another. And then the boiling water will not envelop each one of them. It's going to be a problem. One could also lower the pot into the boiling water through a string. One has to be careful. One should not tie the string that's being used as our pulley to lower down the vessel into the boiling water. It shouldn't be tied tight. It should be loose. Yes? Because if I tie it tight, then the water will not be able to get to the spot where the string is tied tight around this vessel. Halacha Chav Gimel was what I said earlier. You have to be careful that the water should be boiling the entire time of the Hagolah. Sometimes the water cools down. Machmas akelim from the vessels, shamachas l'teichem that are put inside there. One should wait until the water starts to boil once again. And one more point we're going to speak about waiting here. Halacha Chaf Dalet. After one already put the vessel in the water, can leave the vessel in the boiling water for about half a minute. sheyaspiku hamayim lehikonis l'teich teif nakli, in order that should be enough water that should enter the walls of the vessel, l'heitzias isar beluba, and to take out the prohibited substance that's absorbed there. Don't leave the vessel in the water too long. Maybe the vessel will reabsorb. Even though we said before that a vessel, it's not a ben yoimai, doesn't have the koyach, right? A tam a pogam shabai laksa vessel, he doesn't have the koyach to reabsorb in the vessel. We are careful not to leave the pot in too long. We leave it in for about half a minute so it can just get out whatever it's meant to get out, then we take it out because we don't want the spoiled taste to get reabsorbed. Even if the spoiled taste does get reabsorbed, it's still going to be kosher. But we try to be a little bit more careful if possible. Any questions? Halacha chafei. A very large vessel that cannot go into another vessel. It's huge. Let's say it's the size of this room. I go to some factories, by the way. These things actually happen. They have these huge vats. They could double as a swimming pool for those that are really desperate. That you have, for example, cheese vats are humongous. Or beer vats, if they're large. They're like 3 stories high, hundreds of thousands of gallons. Huge. So such a vessel, if it was used for hot, how do you kosher it? So then you kosher it in itself. You somehow find a way that boiling water should boil in it, and you let it boil over the sides. That would be the way to kosher it. A very large vessel that cannot fit into another vessel. This is how you kosher it. You fill it up with water until its lips, and then you turn it on fire so that until it's going to actually boil. When it's boiling, you put a stone or some kind of metal that's hot, that was already hot, right? Then you're kind of splashing the water, should go on the lips of the vessel also. That way it's getting kasher also on its lips, right on the outer side. This is my vessel. I also have to kasher this area here. So the water will be high, and I'm going to take like a paddle, or I could take a stone to make the water, to take up certain mass inside the water. It's going to force the water to spill over to the sides while it's boiling. Then the boiling water is also going to go on the edge of the vessel. Also, the lips of the vessel need to be kashered. Very good, yeah. Any questions? Okay, the next halacha chavav. We also have to kasher the handle of the vessel. Because also the handle got absorbed from forbidden substance. It's enough to kasher the handle through pouring of boiling water from a vessel that was used straight from the fire. Plastic, even a handle of a pot that's made from plastic, one can kasher through pouring of boiling water. We said before that the area from where the handle touches the actual pot, you have to clean very well. We also have to kasher the pot cover, because that also needs full kashering. It needs actual hagala. It doesn't have to have ira. It needs actual hagala of a klivishin that's on the fire. The minhag is that after kashering, we do a cold rinse. Why? Because we want to rid the vessel from any of the taste that came out. Right after the hagola, we rinse the vessel with cold water, in order that it should not reabsorb the hagola waters. However, the hagola is kosher, even if you did not rinse it. Why is it kosher? Commission is per lil, because the vessel was not used for Issa within the last 24 hours, and therefore it's not a ben yain. Okay, now we're going to talk about Pesach. Halacha Chavches, Hamagil Kli La'achshir LePesach, if someone is going to do Hagala on a vessel that they want to kasher for Pesach, Yochel Lagil Gam B'Tich Kli Chometz, one can use a Chometz to kapat, and also inside a kosher pot. In other words, you can take a kosher pot and kasher a Chometz pot inside. Amram in Magila B'Tich Kli Chometz, if you're going to use a Chometz pot as a kashering pot, no go lahachshet chilas laklisha by magil of shein ben yemi. The minig is the first kasher the vessel you're going to use as a kashering pot. Again, we're doing things in the best way possible. In higil b'tichli shel pesach, if you're going to kasher with a pesach vessel, if you want to then use that vessel that you used for kashering, then you have to kasher the vessel again. So again, you can either have a dedicated pot for kashering that's not used within the last 24 hours, or if you want to use a chametz pot, the minig is that we kasher it first and then we use it, kasher the vessel for Pesach. And if we use a Pesach pot, then after that we kasher it before using it again for Pesach. That's the minig. Now, before we go further, I want to give you a little introduction. There's an interesting halacha which actually is related to Shavuos, so it's timely, even though we're after Shavuos. We just finished that beautiful Yom Tov. So the Magen Avraham brings down a halacha, a minute, not to go back and forth to kasher arbitrarily from one status to the other. So we have a bunch of vessels that are dairy, right? And then then we can decide, okay, we're going to kasher them, now turn them into meat. A week later, go back to dairy. We don't go back and forth from dairy to meat and kasher just on a routine basis. Why? Because we're concerned. If you do this regularly, you're going to come to forget what the status of the vessel is, and you think it's dairy, really it's meat, and then you're going to have a problem of using it for the wrong way. It could be basa b'chala. So we're concerned about that. Therefore, he said the minig is not to kasher vessels back and forth arbitrarily like that. There are some exceptions when it will be permissible to kasher. We're going to get into that in a moment. I just want to first explain the rationale and the reason for this idea. No, but minig b'nei Ashkenaz. When Ashkenaz have a minig shalei l'shanis kli chalav l'shimitz b'tzadi. We don't change the status of a dairy vessel to a meat vessel. And in the reverse, we don't change the status of a meat vessel to dairy. Through kashering it. And this again is from the Magen Avraham. Talmud Davar, by the way, the Alter Rebbe does not bring down this opinion. The Alter Rebbe usually does paskin like the Magen Avraham, but the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring it down. So there are some Rabbanim, many Rabbanim want to say that it's a proof that the Alter Rebbe does not hold of this issue, of this minig, not to do it. But nonetheless, we're careful under ordinary circumstances. We're concerned maybe you're only going to have one vessel. You're going to then kasher it boiling water from dairy to meat to dairy to meat, etc. We're going to do all the time. You're going to forget once. You're going to use it without kashering it. You're going to forget because the status keeps changing. There are circumstances where even according to this opinion, the Magen Avraham would hold it's permissible to change his status, and here are the permissible situations when one could change the status of the vessel. In Magil Kli Lachshir LePesach, let's say I'm kashering a vessel to kasher for Pesach, so going from the status of Chometz to Pesach, then I can change the status. Okay, I was using it for Chometz, I was using it for dairy, but now that I'm kashering the vessel, I'm now going to designate it as a meat vessel. Since the purpose of the kashering was not in order to change the status of the vessel from dairy to meat, yes, but rather to kasher it from Chometz to Pesach. So since we had a valid reason with which to kasher it, and now it's kasher, they can now dedicate it as a meat status and change the status. If a vessel became usher, let's say it became treif, then I can kasher it to a status that I of my choice. Okay. Im kibel is a klipa maton relates to the shanois mishimish arishin. Someone gave you a dairy vessel, but you don't need dairy vessels. You need meat vessels in your kitchen. So then you got it as a present, you can kasher it also. So that's considered to be an unusual circumstance. If a year passed when the vessel was used, the vessel was not used for an entire year, then one could change its status. Another way to do this, which is an easier way, is you can kasher a vessel from, let's say, meat status to par. Use it for par for a few weeks. After a certain amount of time, then you want to use it for dairy, that's allowed, because you didn't go directly from meat to dairy, you did a more of a soft landing. You went to par, and then it's acceptable. This is all talking about if you're kashering with hagola, with boiling water. Why? Because when kasher with boiling water, I'm afraid you might forget the status, and it's going to be not kosher. If you're kashering with fire, because then by turning on the fire, by burning it, it's going to burn itself out. Kasher did each time you're going to do it anyways. You're not worried about was it ben yoim or not a ben yoim. Now, there's a little discussion about that with regards to today's ovens, but anyway, that's one of the reasons why it's permissible on Shavuos to kasher our oven. You know, some people don't have a dedicated oven only for dairy, so they're going to take their place oven and kasher it. Considered acceptable under that circumstance. But to do it on a routine basis is a different story, at least according to the Magen Avraham, not necessarily acceptable. But again, some will argue that turning on an oven is different than just Hagol. Hagol is for sure problematic according to Magen Avraham, and an oven is different. Now, an oven is still a little bit different today because the ovens are not actual fire, they're heat. But with regard to this issue, seemingly that even heat would be acceptable as a differentiation from Hagol. What about a machavas? A machavas is a frying pan. Frying pan is different than a regular pot. Because a regular pot, I put boiling water, I put water inside. Let's say I'm making pasta. I have a pot, I have water. The water is going to be my medium. I'm going to have the fire to heat up the water, and the water is now going to cook my pasta. Yeah, whatever you like, Alfredo, whatever, all the good desires. So now, so that means the absorption. Let's say I make Alfredo pasta, dairy pasta inside this pot. The absorption of the dairy went through the medium of water. So I can kasher this pot with water, boiling water. But what about a frying pan where you don't really have too much liquid there? You just have a tiny bit of liquid, so it shouldn't burn. The main absorption of the food that's being fried in a frying pan, unless it's deep fried, is the actual fire. That's a really different story. So many opinions hold that a frying pan, basically, generally speaking, a frying pan would need liban gomer, would need actual fire to kasher it under most circumstances. Unless it's a teira bala, which is a different story, where, let's say, for example, if you had a situation where you had a kosher pot, it's a kosher meat pot that was clean, and mistakenly you cooked cheese in there, and then, right? So the dairy and the meat went in at separate times, then you can kasher it with hagala, because we have this principle known as a teira bala. It went in by itself as permissible material, so it's considered allowed. But when it comes to other things which already have shem iser, one would have to actually do a full-blown liban gomer. Let's look at it inside. A frying pan that you fry in yesh chiluki dinim and tzricha liban agol is in liban agol yesh lishlo shel tzlach meifan ashadat. Yes, the shaila had a kasher. The chatchila should have liban. Some say b'diavad agol is enough. Ulam machmas shemishtam shebei lelei kol shemen. But a frying pan that doesn't use any oil, because again, oil is the medium, then like the Teflon pot, for example, in Lakshir, you cannot kasher it because it would need to get liban gomer, and liban gomer would not work on a Teflon pot. It won't survive the trip. When you have a Teflon pot, a regular pot that I'm cooking boiling water in it, that I could kasher with Hagola because you can boil water in a Teflon pot. When it comes to a frying pan that's not going to survive the trip of getting such intense heat, you can't kasher it. Halacha lamed beis, kedeides tevuos, pots that are colored. Pots that come all kinds of coloring and all kinds of designs. If you need help with painting and artwork, speak to Rabbi Hanoka. Yeah, you can kasher them. And we're not concerned. Maybe the color is going to get in the way of the water in the gospel because it's just a discolorment. It's not a problem. It doesn't have an actual substance. Now, are you allowed to use a vessel that's not kosher? Even let's say in a cold process, cold application. Let's say I have a non-kosher vessel and I want to use it to hold my cup of water for an hour. It's not sitting there for 24 hours. There are questions. You go to a factory, you're making a special kosher production, and the vessel is not kosher, but I'm only want to use it for cold. Is it permissible to use it for cold less than 24 hours on a temporary basis? These are all factors that come into this question. Halacha Lamed Gimel. Kli hatzorech hechsher. A vessel that needs to be kashered, also lehishtamesh bei b'derech keva. One's not allowed to use it on a consistent basis. One's not allowed to use it. Afilu l'maychol tzoynin, even for a cold food, b'terem machshir, before kashering it. Avol mutar lehishtamesh bei b'derech aray. One is allowed to use the vessel on a temporary basis. L'maychol tzoynin, for a cold food, one rinses the vessel and cleans it first. Sakin hatzorech hechsher, a night that needs to be kashen. And you want to use it on a temporary basis. Not enough just to wash it. You have to actually to give it an abrasive clean on the blade to make sure it's clean. Yes. We're not talking about what's inside the vessel, the actual blade. We're talking about just using the knife for cold. So there's two ways you can clean the surface of a knife. One way would be to go in the backyard, to untouched earth, and stab it into the ground 10 times, get a TikTok video going, and make a whole thing about it. That's one way. Another way to do it would be to take steel wool and to rub it with soap, just to you're just cleaning the surface of the knife. Make sure there's no residue, because it could be forbidden fat there. You don't know. That's as long as the knife is not serrated. If it's serrated, it's still a problem. There are those that make a mistake and think that you can kasher any knife that became asur. They need to you're stabbing into the ground or putting it to the ground 10 times. That's not correct. The laws of the knife is equal to all the laws of all vessels. You have to kasher the knife the same way it gets used. So if it gets used through a hot application, I use it to cut, let's say, it was used to cut hot, non-kosher food, then it has to be kasher, but hot, with boiling hot water, or with fire. We said Neitza only helps, putting it into untouched earth only helps to clean what's on the surface of the blade, but not what's absorbed inside the blade itself. This concludes the halachas of kashering vessel.
Bearing.
I'm sorry?
What's the bearing?
Bearing dishes. I don't understand the question. Can you explain?
Everything that you did, it's not just one place to take it.
What do you mean bearing dishes? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I've heard like if people's dishes became trays, they bury them in their yard for like 6 years.
Oh, bury them and then dig them up afterwards?
Like buried it for a moon cycle, like in Russia they bury it in the ground for a moon cycle, and then when they came to America they excavate that. So
Really?
yeah.
Interesting.
Very-
So they buried it for a year or more?
No, 1 month moon cycle.
They buried it for a month and then they would kasher it?
No, they were said, great, it's proper. That's what. Yeah. Nothing, right?
Interesting. I never heard that before. Very interesting. We learn something new every day. There is a concept of putting the vessel in the ground, but that would be with regard to a knife. Or even a fork. Yeah.
Why?
Because it gets through the abrasive force of the dirt going into the knife. If it's untouched hard earth, it's cleaning the blade by having that abrasive effect like this. It's rubbing against the blade. Okay, that's all for that. How many more classes do we have to the end of the year? Anyone know? Top of their head? One more. Yeah, Thursday. Yeah. This coming Thursday is the last class.
Next.
And next Thursday, got it. Okay. So, here, okay. First of all, any questions about kashering before we go on? Okay, a few things I want to just speak about with regards to kashering that are on the practical side. If you're kashering with boiling water, you have to be very, very careful, because even though boiling water cannot burn down a house, God forbid, right? But boiling water does splash. And when boiling water gets on the floor becomes slippery. So first of all, if you're going to kasher with boiling water, do not wear shoes that have a flat bottom. You have to wear something that has cleats, like a boot or something like, like you would wear on, let's say, on the snow or the ice, so that if you're standing on something that's wet, you're not going to slip on that surface. That's number one. Another thing is some people wear an apron just as a shield in case something splashes. You have the apron protecting it. It could be like a rubber apron or very thick plastic, just as a shield as well. And the third thing to keep in mind when you're kashering with boiling water is you kasher something furthest away from you, and then you work your way back towards the thing closest to you. Because if you kasher the thing that's closest to you, then you lean over to the thing that's furthest from you, you can burn yourself. So it's necessary to be very thoughtful and to be very methodical how we do it. And if you're careful, it'll be okay. But that's just something, and also ask advice from people that have done it so that you'll be able to get these tips. When you kasher with fire, so fire has the advantage it's more focused, but also, of course, has the disadvantage that it could be more destructive. So one has to be careful in both applications, and it's very important to make sure that the windows are open when you're kashering with fire, so the heat does not get too intense, or and sometimes it could be bad fumes also when you're kashering with fire. So that's another reason why make sure that the windows are open. Okay.
I have a question about knife. You can't really like kosher the handle of a knife. So how does that work with like cleaning it in the sink?
It depends. If the handle is attached to the blade very, very tightly, and there's no possibility for any residue to get stuck inside, then you can soak it and clean, then you put kasher it. But when you have the problem with residue, you first have to get rid of the residue before you kasher it.
It's like I have a bunch of knives from when I was in culinary school, and like I assume they were washed like in very, very hot water.
So you can send me pictures, I can guide you what you could or couldn't do. Okay, very good. Next week we'll wrap up the year. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a siyum in that sense.